federal funding freezes, an attack on DEI, and what is working in local ecosystem building today on the Builders Conference podcast. Don't know why I said conference, just Builders podcast. See you on the other side. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically We're a News Organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Still figuring out how we're doing this podcast thing because we technically have doing live conversations, but it's newly in a podcast format with two homies, friends of the show, Brian Brackeen, founding partner of Lightship Capital, and Victor Hwang, the founding CEO, Victor, of Right to Start. Right, Victor? I'm going to get it right one of these times. Sure.
Founder, finder, it's all the kind of the same thing.
Welcome to our conference, Victor.
Yeah, well, we're doing a conference, just the three of us now. Gentlemen, thank you for being for second installment of this. Let's start with light stuff, because I'm trying to figure out, you've heard this from me, guys. I'm trying to navigate how we have consequential conversations about what is happening locally in ecosystem building. But there is some federal stuff that is trickling down, and our reporting shows it. You guys are experiencing it. But let's start with some bright lights. Brian, Victor, you guys both do a lot of traveling and a lot of work in a lot of different ecosystems around the country. Start us with some good feels. What right now are you feeling good about or seeing? What are some bright lights in local ecosystem building that are ringing in your head? You don't have to pick any favorites, but just an example or two of bright lights you're seeing in the world.
I'll go first. You know, I'm a recent board member of Endeavor, great organization serving ecosystems around the world. We got an update this morning from Linda, and I'll save her announcements for announcements, but I'll say that they're really doubling down on ecosystems, and they see the value. Investments going well, all the green lights. Right? We read a lot of bad stuff in the news, a lot, right? But know that people are really, 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 they just want to help entrepreneurs. And it's going really, really well all across the country.
And Endeavor, just give a plug for Endeavor as a community for entrepreneurs. What is it for the folks who don't know?
Sure. Very short version is endeavor.org. It's basically back in the old days when VC was only in Silicon Valley, maybe a little bit in New York, but even quite frankly, before New York had a huge scene. They thought, how could we help entrepreneurs in other places in the US and around the world? And basically give them venture capital style mentorship and ultimately funding as well. But we did it everywhere else, right? And it's been a wild success. There are almost 3,000 Endeavor entrepreneurs all over the world, and they generate billions and billions of dollars of money. The biggest takeaway, though, is they try to invest in really positive people, right? The idea is let's use a lever of capitalism to help positive entrepreneurs, which have a multiplier effect because they'll support and hire and spit out more positivity, and the world gets to be a better place.
The community is working. Victor, you travel quite a bit. What's the bright light?
Yeah, well, I took a road trip last fall, and some of these stories. One of the great things of great American road trips is you kind of get to open the hood up of America. You get to look under the hood and see the engine. And the coolest thing is just the innovation that continues to happen in the unlikely places across America. Like in Portland, Oregon, the hardest hit part of town, Old Town. If you go behind the buildings and you look behind the windows that are shuttered up, there's an effort to build a shoe innovation district in Portland. Basically, all the shoe entrepreneurship and innovation in one block. Made in Old Town is the name of that effort. It's sort of remarkable what's going on there. In Akron, Ohio, in the tire district and the old Goodyear plant, they built one of the coolest innovation co-working spaces, Bounce Innovation Hub there. They've taken the old Goodyear tire plant, and so it's still like a Goodyear tire plant with like the elevators are like made for like tire manufacturing and everything, but the whole space is just open to the community. And this is a collaborative effort with the private sector and the foundations, the Burton D. Morgan Foundation there and a bunch of others. It's just very exciting. And on and on. There's just, if you get a chance to kind of really look behind the scenes in America, in the places that were down and out not that long ago, there's cool stuff happening.
If we're shouting out locations, I gotta give one more. Since we're, we live Ohio love. I put it in the chat for the private chat. Chris can share if you'd like. The Hub Dayton, a 200,000 square foot and a co-working space with this beautiful, almost cathedral-like setting. You just would never know that Dayton, Ohio had such an amazing spaces. Also, the University of Dayton Venture Fund, which is actually run out of there, it's the largest venture fund in the country. They're managing at this point almost $100 million at the students. You would never know, right? So yeah, really good things going on over there in Ohio as well.
Those are great, and maybe we can do a fresh roundup. It's nice to remember we're still building, and the entrepreneurship and innovation conversations still localizing around local specialization, which Victor, you called out in both of your examples. I want to do a different kind of one that I want to shout out as a bright light. One of these key issues that I find lights my fire is immigration. I think it's such a defining, the like cornerstone of American exceptionalism. And we technically, the newsroom has done some really fabulous specialized reporting on a ton of individual immigration stories. The shout out actually to the Mary Sefa Fund, but wanted to call out how much detail goes into the immigration system that gets us, the entrepreneurs and the tech workers, in so many roles. It's not just H-1B visas, F-1 visas, a ton. So I've been fascinated by the really deep personal stories the newsroom has been putting on around the different immigration pathways, both so like employers get it and ecosystem folks get it. There's a lot that gets us the labor force that we need, that makes the American economy do what it does. And I think we need a lot more comfort with how varied it is. So I think it's a bright light as I see so much local organizing around supporting and rallying to the immigration experience. It is such a beautiful part of American life. I think we need that a lot right now. All right, let me use that as a way to turn in. As we promised last time, this is intended to be a podcast around local ecosystem building. But I will say, for us at Technically, which remains very steadfast focused on local, I will tell you, we're getting already a lot of like push on how some federal stories are playing out locally. Our newsroom's done a bit of reporting on the Tech Hubs program, subsidiary of the Chips and Science Act, most of which those tech hubs look and feel very bipartisan. A lot of national security in there. It's kind of, yes, it's industrial policies, but it's pretty classic jobs, research and development, advanced research, again, national security stuff, feels safe. But folks around that orbit are a little spooked around what's happening with federal funding, how much that might trickle down for them. We're seeing other examples where programs that like were loosely associated with a broad category of diversity, equity, and inclusion feel like they're feeling the pinch. We technically are actually kind of indirectly involved in a project that we've seen kind of funding stop. So just kind of curious, Victor and Brian, as two guys who champion local a lot, two guys who I know who view local as a way to kind of do some bipartisanship. I'm wondering what you're telling folks in the local environment who have opinions on whatever political spectrum about the moment we're having in federal politics. What's your advice right now navigating federal national stuff when it comes to local ecosystem building? Because I need some of this advice.
Yeah, well, it's tough for a lot of organizations that have depended on federal grants or have a grant in place or a contract in place, and they're not sure if they're going to get paid right now. So it's for real and it's brutal. And I think it's hard to give advice in these situations, because it's not like I know more than others do about what's going on with all the lightning and thunder. But grit your teeth is probably the best advice I've heard out there, which is it's going to be a rocky ride in a lot of ways, because there's just a lot of disruption and unpredictability that's happening. So grit your teeth, ride it out. I think, by and large, it's so interesting, because at the federal level, at the national level, when you read the stories of what's going on, it's such a contrast with basically 80-90% of Americans you talk with at the local level that are doing the work, and they're just busy doing the work. And Americans are, by and large, incredibly friendly when you roll into a town or a community and you just say, "Hey, I'm here. What's going on here?" How what people are, by and large, very friendly. They want to help. They want to involve you, and so it's almost like it's like a two different universes. It's like alternate universes when you read the news versus when you're actually out in the world or out in America doing stuff. And that's just an interesting thing. It's almost like we're almost like Jekyll and Hyde in our brains and how we think about this, how we think about narrative. Like the narrative of our real lives, of the real people we talk to, is very different from the narrative as you read it. And that's, I don't know. I think it's not, at some point, like, it's got to resolve, right? We've got to figure out who we are as a nation, as a people. And my hunch is there'll be a big part of that coming in the next year. Next year is America's 250th birthday. And I am actually, I may not look it, but I'm old enough to remember America's 200th birthday and America's 100th birthday of the Statue of Liberty celebration, which are really interesting events, even in my childhood, because I remember how powerful they became in redefining the American narrative of who are we, why are we here, where are we headed as a nation. They just because they permeate the whole year of events. It's so interesting. And I think that's about to happen to us again, and we may not be ready for it, but I think it's going to be a moment where a lot of these issues that we're dealing with now, the sort of the dichotomy of who we are nationally versus who we are locally, that's all going to start to come to a head in the next year. It has to, because of that re-examination that's about to happen.
So, Victor, Chris and I are Philadelphians. I don't know if you know that. And so, number one, two things. You're welcome, since we created America. And we also created the Philadelphia Eagles. And so another, go Birds, and throw that in there as well this time of year.
Wow. Well, as someone who just spent 7 years in Kansas City, that hurts a bit. But I'll let it go.
But on to the first question, to your first question, Chris. I'm a little worried about the impact that different cities will have based on what they do. Kind of like let me just be more specific. If you have an R1 research university in your town, they are oftentimes the largest employer. Universities are great at getting federal grants. Like, they're like probably some of the best of anybody getting federal grants. And so when your ecosystem is driven around, let's say you're Columbus and Ohio State, right? And you're doing spinoffs and IP spinouts. I can see you being more greatly affected than someone, let's say, like Tulsa, where it's generally driven around one billionaire's philanthropic private capital, right? And so, yeah, I worry that certain cities are going to be hit worse than others, and oftentimes those cities are some of the ones that are creating some of the best IP in the country.
And I'm just throwing here in the background, Brian, as you go through that, we technically always pay a lot of attention to the R&D spending, and one of the resources we've always used as a proxy for R&D is NSF, the National Science Foundation, one of the largest deployers of federal R&D spending. We did an innovation ecosystems map that we launched in December, and one of the big inputs was how active is R&D spending in your region, and one of the proxies for that was the research university. So sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to background, but you
I love when you tell me I'm right, Chris. You can do that all day. What were the top 10, if I could ask just really quickly?
So yeah, if you look at this, let's see if I can zoom us in there. It's a little harder to do that, but yeah, for those who are listening in and not on video, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore is a massive deployer. This is National Science Foundation. This is not all R&D spending, but is a decent proxy because most of these somewhat mirror. Though I sometimes get my friendly data friends to push on me on this. University of California system performs really well. UC San Francisco in particular actually always surprises me how big. University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia is always a top 5, but it's University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, University of Washington, Seattle, University of Wisconsin in Madison, University of California in LA, again, the University of California system, because UC San Diego also shows up. And then North Carolina, the Research Triangle, Stanford rounds up the top 10.
Yeah, pop in there and just kind of round out the point, right? So some of those cities can afford some of the capital to be pulled out because there's such a robust capital stack from a variety of different areas. We talk about Madison, Ann Arbor, right? Some of these places, that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow.
I talked to 2 top 50 R&D universities in the last 90 days, last 30 days even. And both have a story that they think they can make a case through the importance of commercialization, but I can't convey some of the best reporting techniques doing right now is there is not an institution that's not shaking in their boots and has no idea how to talk about this publicly. And they are not talking about it publicly, but they are absolutely changing where their investments are. They are absolutely shifting. They're holding in a way that I haven't seen since that like spring of the pandemic era. And that might be gleeful for some. And so again, regardless of your politics, it's going to have ripple effects in a local context. Victor, I'm sorry I cut you off there.
No, not at all. And a lot of that, the biggest funder of research outside of DoD is the NIH, and so a lot of it's medical spending, which is why you see UCSF and Hopkins so high on the list.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I think there's some places that are just going to be hit harder by a lot of the money that's been held up or is in confusion right now. And it takes time for the courts to work their way through and figure out exactly how much authority does an executive branch have. Those are all questions that, we're going to test out in real time. That we've avoided testing a lot of these questions as a country for a long time, and we're about to find out. But it's going to take a good 6 to 12 months for a lot of this stuff to play out, to even get preliminary answers on these things. So, one thing we've seen, which is kind of ironic, which is the more dysfunctional the federal stuff is, the more interest there is in entrepreneurship. Amazingly, it's because it's still it's one of the few major issues in America that actually is unifying and pulls people together. And so one of the things we've seen is talking about entrepreneurship as a unifying political narrative actually is very effective at the local and the state level, especially in a time where people seem to disagree about everything. When you start talking about entrepreneurship and the power to create jobs, to lift communities, to create wealth, to raise incomes, to fight poverty, fight inequality, it's pretty universal how broad that is, but it's also one of those issues that doesn't get talked about much, which means it's still pretty fresh. This was our polling data. 94% of Americans think this is a fundamental issue for America, which is expanded entrepreneurial opportunity. And so it's very, like, there's really no other issue that gets 94% of Americans to say yes, we agree. And so a lot of the challenges and people trying to figure out how do you talk about our work at a local level, there's a huge opportunity to still do that, but to maybe talk about it in ways that have broader political appeal across the political aisle. So we've been doing this work. We actually just hosted a gathering at this retreat called Sunnylands, which is Walter Annenberg's old retreat, the Annenberg Foundation, and we had leaders from across the aisle, former governors, heads of foundations, entrepreneurs across the aisle, and by and large, there's just a tremendous amount of energy on this issue as a way to unite America, to renew America, to kind of keep America going forward again, as opposed to stuck in this kind of chaos and dysfunction. So it's there. It's there to be talked about in a way that actually can drive political energy. And I think in a way we've avoided that so far a lot with entrepreneurship. We just could have done the work quietly on the side, but I think there's a chance to really move it into the front of the American debate, which is this is a unifying force that can drive forward motion.
I want to linger once more on the kind of federal landscape, then push back into local. But I pulled up. I wanted to actually in part get your stuff up, Victor, but I didn't in ease get it. So instead, just wanted to point one thing. This is from the fall, admittedly, but just echoing. Forget these kind of all of these. This is from a talk I did focused on how much local performs well. I have a mentor who used to always say that it's very hard to hate up close. And so she always felt that like the retreat of local dynamism is where so much of our partisan comes from in all forms, because like it's tough to hate the neighbor, but when we start polarizing and only look at national level, we lose sight of it. Anyway, when you look across like everything, it's always local that performs well. So this middle one is just showing that actually local government polls better than federal. Always, I'll point out, in the media landscape, local tends to outperform national in how people feel to media. But to Victor's point over here on the left, which might be a little bit hard to see, but to zoom in on that, different polls survey it differently. But this is Pew's from the fall, looking at small business. Almost 9 in 10 Americans say that small business are an aggregate net good in their community, and it's sometimes 2, 3, sometimes 4 times as high as any other institution polled. So again, small business, startup, these terms are used differently in different polling, but just echoing Victor's point that when you want to talk about coalition building, the reason the case that entrepreneurship is a good bedrock for coalition building is even when you look at how people politically identify, some version of entrepreneurship always polls well. So can we just do a moment here on coalition building, Victor, Brian? Because I think one of the things that you guys inspire me on, one of the things that this work around ecosystem building or entrepreneurship or kind of like workforce, any of these economic issues that I view can be kind of an attractant for a coalition. But it takes some work to get there. I guess I'm just kind of curious, how are you guys seeing different kinds of people coming together on these issues that you do so much work on? And Victor, I am thinking about you because you are like chief wrangler and coalition building around the country right now on these issues. How are you seeing it play out kind of in different political environments?
Wrangler is a great term. I'll take that. We've just in the last several months, we've launched 2 in-state coalitions in Arkansas and Indiana, and we've launched a virtual coalition in New Mexico. And right to start now, we're getting ready to launch 5 more in-state coalitions this year across the country. So we're actually looking for coalition managers in California, Michigan, Missouri, New York, and North Carolina. And so the work is happening. And we had over a dozen Right to Start Act bills introduced based off of our ideas from states all across the spectrum, and from political leaders all across the ideological spectrum. And they're such similar bodies of ideas. Create an office of entrepreneurship, put someone in charge of entrepreneurship in the state, track entrepreneurs, open up government contracting on entrepreneurs, shift economic development to entrepreneurs. Like, all this stuff is broadly appealing for people. And I love that phrase, it's hard to hate up close. It reminds me of that old quote. I think people say, maybe it was Tolstoy, 1 death is a tragedy and 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic. I think of that as that's like an entrepreneur. Like, 1 entrepreneur can be a tragedy, but like a million entrepreneurs is just a statistic. And I think a lot of that statistics is what we hear at the national level, is like people throw numbers around that are so big, it's not even real numbers, right? It's almost like, it's like performative at that level of like people talking in just abstraction. But you get to the local level, and every business that doesn't make it, every business that does make it, has life or death consequences for the people involved. And you just feel it so much more viscerally. And I think that's what we found, is at the local state level, the energy is there. I mean, it's still going on. So we just also launched a national network of public leaders in entrepreneurship. It's called NELN, N-E-L-N, the National Entrepreneurship Leaders Network. So we gathered the heads of entrepreneurship in a number of states together and said, do you guys know each other? And we found that they didn't even know each other. And so we've been the ones actually organizing them into a network now of the heads of entrepreneurship in different states. We have 10 of them now that we just had the first gathering on virtually. And we have 3 inaugural co-chairs, and they're out of Nevada, Missouri, and Michigan. So states with very different politics and different ways of thinking and different narratives, but they're all part of this effort, and they've been leading the charge with us on that too.
My Russian friends, I have to just note, yes, that quote that Victor calls out is Stalin, not Tolstoy, a very different Russian, but nonetheless it makes it chilling. Brian, I want to loop back to something Victor said, but I'm wondering your experience in what you're seeing of cross political dynamics, which I've heard you talk about. You've talked about balancing this. What's that moment look like? I
can't believe I quoted Stalin. I retract that.
Well, no, I think actually, because I've been down this road. Actually, the quote's great. You just have to couch it in like, that's why it's so chilling. The quote's powerful because it's deeply chilling coming from him. So that's why I wanted to bail you out.
Thank you for the save.
So it wasn't beautifully written by Tolstoy. It was chillingly provocative by one of the worst humans of the 20th century.
Well, I'll try to not answer with a Mussolini quote here. Our ecosystems. When you look at the goal or the outcome that people are trying to achieve, whether it be in quote a red state and blue state, and by the way, a lot of people like Victor and I don't even adhere to a lot of those kind of monikers, right? Because we're kind of driven by outcomes and not by political parties. But when you look at the way even like RPs and things are written and who's administering, capital in a red state versus a blue state, they're all trying to like get a great bakery or coffee shop or startup or growth company in their community. It's all the end result is identical. The way they go about it is often quite different. And for instance, I think Ohio does one of the best jobs in the world. They essentially have franchised their liquor, right, into an organization that provides capital. I think New York also does a great job, and they tax and kind of bring it into a central place, and they hand it out, both with the exact same goal, right? And so, if you can get beyond the middleman, right, and just really think about entrepreneurs, really get Chris, it's your work, get all the way down to that human. And how do I best serve that person and build your ecosystem development plan around those people? You absolutely can succeed in any environment.
All right, let me push on this once, then we'll go on. I said to you guys before I was going to pull it up because I love this. It's Bernice Johnson Reagan, the composer, says if you're in a coalition and you're comfortable, it's not a broad enough coalition. And I'm here to tell you that rings true on all kinds of different coalitions. There are very problematic coalitions that follow that exact logic, that have built frameworks around people they don't all necessarily agree with. And so I think entrepreneurship, this ecosystem building, this like, hey, how do we get, like, I think of economic mobility as my framing. I want people to have their best chance at economic prosperity. And so I think like workforce pathways and entrepreneurship pathways, that's my rootedness, that I care about that. And so if you're serious about that work, I'm down to talk to you if you're good faith serious about letting all people have their best shot at economic prosperity. But all three of us could get hollered, and I'm sure all of us have been hollered at some point by like, the game has changed, the stakes are higher, and isn't it nice that you can sit in your little podcast and talk about this stuff and ignore the hard realities of political divisiveness? So let me just do one last shove on you guys to push back on this idea of have we moved beyond the ability to coalition build on something and we look Pollyannish, or is this really like serious, come to the moment kind of stuff?
You're really trying to get us to throw stones and like light the building on fire.
Yeah, right. Like let's have a convo,
Yeah. I this is still a bottom-up democracy, like despite what you think, right? I mean, the national elections are decided by like 1.5 points or something like that. These are, it's not. I think there's a lot of overreading of the swing. Like it's like we're talking like tiny slivers of the country that swing back and forth politically. But there is a shift in the vibe and the narrative for sure that's going on. But power in this country still derives from the bottom up, long term. I mean, short term, people can drive narratives at the top. But if you look at the what people say and do, like some of the like Mark Andreessen has been associated with the White House right now, and he talks about building stuff. And it's entrepreneurial dynamism is really the thing that drove his vote. Well, you see a lot of people on the other side who believe in entrepreneurial dynamism as well, who voted in the other direction. And to Brian's point, they all want the same thing. They want America to make stuff again. They want us to produce stuff. They want that opportunity broadly distributed. Those are the same basic fundamental things. I will say my sense is both political parties haven't really gotten it yet. Like they're still talking about how do you solve problems from the top down, as opposed to how do you unleash the American people to solve the problems from the bottom up. And I think whichever party or politician or set of leaders figures out how to talk about that is gonna capture the next couple decades of sort of majority, because ultimately that's what this country is. It's a country about like, give me power, give me agency to live my life, to forge my future. And it's not how do we cut up the pie at the top for people in better. It's about give me the agency to live the life I want and to build the life for those I love and the community around me. And that message has not been articulated as I've seen it in the political level yet in America. But I think it's right there for the taking, in my opinion. And every major movement in American history, and we've been through a lot in this country, has come from the bottom up. It's not been from the top down. It's always been from the bottom up. It's always been that unexpected set of voices that really, caught fire and changed the way people think. And I think we have been so far missing leaders to really grasp that and grasp how to talk about that. And if you look at the ideas and the policies that are still talked about, they're very much like let the people in DC solve it for us, as opposed to give us the tools to solve our own problems, which is a very different narrative. And I haven't heard that spoken yet, but I think someone's going to figure that out in the coming few years.
One of the problems with coalition building, in fact, why it's so hard to build a coalition today, is that people ascribe evilness to the other side, independent of knowing the other person, right? Well, you believe this, so you must be evil, right? And so I'm just going to give a real specific example. On the DEI stuff, there are anti-DEI camps. Some people who are anti-DEI, and this is not the majority, but some wild minority of them are most likely racist. Then there's a lot of other people who just want fairness, which we think we all want. And there's actually people like me who I've actually been on before all this DEI conversation. I am well on record on Twitter being kind of anti-DEI because I thought that too often corporations were hiring people that were just throwing parties and handing out shrimp and having concerts and not doing the work, right? Like not really getting contracts for people, with that corporation. And I felt that they were kind of issuing a beautiful report every year, but hijacking the conversation. And then oftentimes, if you're a women or minority contractor, you got pushed to this ineffective person as opposed to going directly to the purchasing manager, right? And we see this even now in venture capital. I'm having conversations. And look, you love these real names and things, Chris. I'm going to give you those. We're having conversations with people like Cambridge, right? Who is like they manage all the money for like endowments and things. They have a diversity group, and we're looking for investment. Now, just because we're African American doesn't mean that I want to talk only to the sub-diversity group. I would like to talk to just the main book, right? The regular folks that make allocations. But we keep getting, no matter who we talk to, we keep getting shepherded back to this group. And why would that be? Only because of race. I don't like that form of DEI. I'm anti-DEI in this category. I'm not like the other reasons other people are. So there's an anti-DEI coalition there where we actually share a lot of the same values, but I don't ascribe that everyone who's anti-DEI is good or that they're all evil either. Like it's more complicated than that.
A lot to unpack there. I feel like it'd be its own session, Bri. That the addition I want to make that maybe ties us together, and maybe touches on the next point I want to hit on in our last kind of like 5 to 10 minutes here. In political science, I'm going to forget the term. There's a term how it's a mistake to like associate the stance of a kind of a regional or national government to be consistent with all its people. Just like at any given time in our own country, that again, regardless of your politics, you might know that the people's will might not always perfectly align with leadership. You can have feelings about the Chinese Communist Party, and there's nothing to do with most Chinese people who are exactly like everyone else. And you might have a problem with any given Iranian government, but it's nothing to do with the Iranian people. Like those are different things. The people and the head of state are different things. And there's some term in political science that maybe someone can help me remember what the term is. And I feel like there's a similar thing in geographies that happens all the time, that like division seems to be unwieldy. And we get ourselves in trouble when we kind of conflate kind of the head of the state and the people that presumably they represent in any kind of fashion. And we're usually better off, which is why I think I like local. It's why I think about it's hard to hate up close. But when you never get close, you just kind of say, I have this cartoonish view of what a leader is, and then I just put that on a group of people, and you get yourself in some some big trouble there. And coalition building for me looks a lot like, let me go find those people who I'm much more interested in, finding actual human beings whose stories are, in my 20 years of journalism, everyone's story is more complex. Everyone's politics are more complex. Everyone's opinions are more complex than what they say on social media or what you think of when you hear who they voted for. But we sometimes don't give anyone else a chance to have complexity, but we give ourselves lots of complexity. We know, well, I'm very complex, but that other group must not be. They must be the exact same. And I think the only way I've found that to work, and what I would want to say to ecosystem builders around the country is like, I don't know how to do that other than the Thanksgiving table rule, which is like, if you don't want to talk to your uncle about politics, don't talk to your uncle about politics. And what can you talk to your uncle about? I'll get pushback on that. Might be ignoring important issues. I just don't know how to do it otherwise. And
I love
take
that.
feedback otherwise.
Yeah, well, I love that. It's yeah, I think it's that concept of attribution about, are we, how uniform are we? There have been studies on average, and the reason like so many chairs were uncomfortable is because no one was actually average. Like they kept trying to make chairs for people that were average, but the number of people that are average was actually a really tiny percentage of people. So they found that you couldn't do that. You had to make things that were very customizable for everyone that was not average, because very few people are actually average. And there was a great there's this political philosopher, not to get a bit out there, but Michael Sandel, and he used to host a series of like conversations with groups of people around political philosophy. And he had one where he went to a bunch of young people that were of this was in Japan, Korea, and China, because you all may know these countries hate each other historically, and they have a lot of bad blood over the last 100 years between these countries. And they had these younger people in a forum talking about what was wrong with different, talking about other countries. And it was so interesting is this started where the young people would say, the young Korean people, they blamed the Japanese. The young Chinese would blame the Japanese, and then the young Japanese would say like, well, those were our grandparents. Like, why are you revisiting the sins of our grandparents on us? Like, we didn't do that stuff. But then a lot of the younger folks today still want to get, paid back for the sins of grandparents. And there's a sense of like, you get it from both sides, which is the sins were real. There was grievous harm done to different sides. At the same time, the young people are like, we didn't do it. And in fact, we view things very differently. Why do we have to pay the price for something that happened 100 years ago? And I think you see a lot of that attribution that happens today, where people are like, we get it. We get why people are upset. But at the same time, we are also individuals trying to live our lives today. And why should we pay for the sins of our parents or grandparents or great grandparents or whatever? And you get both sides. I mean, these are things that cannot easily be resolved. But I think it all, as you were saying, Chris, you get down to the level of the individual, and it's hard. There's no one average. Everyone's got a nuance. Everyone's got a different angle on it, and you see the human stories much differently. And I think it's a time that requires extraordinary leadership, but we haven't had extraordinary leaders. I feel like sometimes our leaders are just cosplaying leaders. They're kind of pretending to like say things like leaders, but are they really getting down to the level of like, how do you make the lives of this person better, truly? And to understand all the nuance and the layers of how capital turns into businesses, creates jobs, creates wealth, creates products. All that nuance, all the layers and complexity is sort of lost in sort of modern discussion. And I feel like this is the job of those of us in entrepreneurship, which is we know that stuff. Like if we've been on the front lines of how you build value, how you create stuff, how you make things, how you create incomes that weren't there, how you create jobs that weren't there. And that's not a partisan issue. It's a very human issue, but it doesn't get talked about because it actually requires deep thinking and deep leadership to do. But I think that kind of leadership, I think, is incumbent on us when no one else is filling that gap.
There's no average seems powerful, Victor. So to translate that to our ecosystem building friends, all of us, you can't get over your skis on what you can solve for. You might not be the one to lead a truth and reconciliation gathering for your community, but you might be able to like get some people around an issue that's important. I'm going to lose you guys in a minute, so I'm going to make kind of a hard turn here for hey, so much local ecosystem building work happens locally, but there's a fascinating flourishing of communities of practice around the world in some sense, which in truth, I'm just playing catch up on. For 15, 16 years, I was doing this work, but I think really over the last year and a half, I'm really poking my head up and recognizing what a flourishing of people talking about this practice is. So I was gathering a list of places of mid to biggish conferences I saw people gathering to talk about this work. I want to just throw them up and talk to you guys a little bit about where you're going to gather in person in 2025 to talk about this work, or just places you might suggest. So for those who are listening, I'll just read through them. But for those in the video, I'll throw up ones that I'm at least tracking for us over at Technically. I'll quick run through just because it's some folks will be listening in, but we just passed a few in the fall that don't yet have 2025 dates. So to shout out our friends at EcoMap, who launched their SuperConnect user conference, the Association of University Research Parks, AURP, is now talking about this sort of work. SSTI, the state-backed technology institutes, this is like TEDCO in Maryland, Ben Franklin Technologies in Pennsylvania, VIPC in Virginia, and many groups. Their annual conference in December had issues of entrepreneurial engagement, but now into 2025, Arlington, Virginia will be hosting NATO, and UED, the University Economic Development Association. They're talking about ecosystem building. Our friends at NBIA, Charles, who's a friend of the show, they'll be in Philadelphia in April for their gathering. The Global Institute on Innovation Districts I was just introduced to, they'll be in Mexico in April, but they're having an ecosystem layer. Startup Champions Network, OGs in the kind of like ecosystem building at a local level gathering. Shout out to them being in Las Vegas, May 6th, May 8th. We slightly overlap us at Technically. Our longtime readers conference is going hard at this like ecosystem storytelling part. That's the contribution we want to be at. May 8th, May 9th, we'll be in Philadelphia. Global Entrepreneurs Network, their Global Entrepreneurship Congress happens in June. TECHNA, which is a great association of associations, tech associations that is talking about entrepreneurial engagement and this work now. Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, they apparently have an entrepreneurship engagement layer now and using some ecosystem language. And IEDC, friends of many of ours, their annual conference, Victor helped get them to do more entrepreneurial engagement this past fall, and they'll be back in September, and they'll be in Detroit, Michigan. So that was a lot quickly, but Victor, Brian, are you going to any of these, or have you been to any of these, or any thoughts about the gathering of the practice of people doing ecosystem building?
I'll go first because I think Victor should be the final word on
love that
this topic. One, I also think shout out to us. We're going to be live at Technically's conference, I think, right? And that's one of our hopes.
One way or another, we'll at least be gathering it. Yes, we're gonna. I have some details that yes, but yes,
we're gonna try to be there. So so hopefully we'll get a chance to meet some folks there. I'll also say beyond this great list, people are meeting at the other international conferences and having these conversations as well. Like FII was just recently in Miami, but also there's conferences in Cape Town, London, Sao Paulo, that are where we're getting together, having kind of those global conversations and what lessons can we learn and bring back to the US. And I'd love to see Technically Sao Paulo one day. That'd be a great section on your site.
Trying to make that happen.
I'll be there for that.
Hell yes.
Yeah. The Global Entrepreneurship Congress is a big one. I don't know if you or your readers know this thing started in the United States like 13, 14 years ago in Kansas City. The Kauffman Foundation was one of the co-hosts of that. And it basically left America for all that time until this year. So this is the first time the Global Entrepreneurship Congress is coming back to the United States. It'll be in Indianapolis. They had like it's like 150 countries that are represented there, including ministers of the economy, the heads of entrepreneurship, international organizations, and my organization, Right to Start, is going to have its first ever in-person network meeting, and so we're going to actually use the opportunity at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress to invite everyone to participate in that as well. So it's just going to be a heck of an event, and the hosts in Indiana are just fantastic leaders. David Watkins and his crew are going to be hosting this thing, and it's going to be a bang up event. I think it's going to be you're going to have a lot of the people who've been involved in entrepreneurship development from across the whole country that will be there, and it's sort of a reunion of sorts for the global network of people that have been really involved in this work.
well said. And I got to shout out because someone points out on LinkedIn that I overlooked, but I did hear this. Main Street is hosting their gathering of local economic development organizations April 7th, 9th in Philadelphia. It's a similar time with NBIA, a few in Philly kind of coincidentally this year. But the what I think is interesting, and thank you for calling this out. I don't know why your name isn't showing up in the view, but like the point that I think I'm trying to make with this, many of these conferences are long standing, right? NBIA, the 39th year, IEDC. Many of these groups are well established, but are coming to this center of entrepreneurial engagement. And I think this language of ecosystem building that still probably has a little bit of a jargony tone to it does feel like it's getting traction. We technically see most economic development organizations that we work with have someone who has something like ecosystem in their title. We see it showing up in corporate roles. Shout out to Andy Stoll, friend of the show, for his work, former colleague of Victor, kind of helping to support communities of practice. So many people are contributing here. That gives me some hope, and yeah, we're gonna all these conferences are gonna start having us at all their conferences, Victor and Brian, because we're gonna be gathering the best practices around it. So we'll be in Sao Paulo soon enough. I went long because we went long, gentlemen. One, can I say thanks for the conversation? Two will be next month. For those in the viewing, whether you're reviewing it live or not, Brian, Victor, and I signed up for a 6-month little trial here to see if we could be helpful. So this is 2 of 6. And then Victor and Brian and I are going to get together and be like, was that a great use of time or terrible? So as you listen in, let us know if you think it's terrible or not, or point us in the direction of where we can be most helpful. For now, Victor and Brian, thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian. Great talking to you guys again.
Good seeing you guys.
See you next time. Bye.